So welcome everybody. This is the fall mentorship talk, and I'm Jackie Grappa. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Latinx task force, and Nick is here too. He's my co-chair. He was the one who sent a message about how you can ask your questions. And on behalf of the Latinx task force, I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to introduce our three panelists. First, we have Dr. Adriana Nevado. She graduated from the PsyD. She's a pediatric psychologist in the Eating Disorders Clinic in Adolescent Medicine at Akron Children's Hospital in Ohio. Then I'll stop sharing so you can see them. So this is Dr. Adriana Nevado. I think you can all see her now. And so we also have Lorena Velasquez. She graduated from the Master's in Counseling. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist. She recently passed her licensing exam, and she's currently working at Starlight Community Services, and she's a bilingual mental health specialist. And last but not least, we have Tim Espinosa. And he graduated from the undergraduate program. He's currently working with Uplift Family Services as a family specialist with the Prevention and Early Intervention program. And he's also in the Master's in Counseling Psychology program at Santa Clara University. So welcome to our panelists. Each of you is going to have like 15 minutes to present. We thank you so much for taking time off your busy schedules to be here and share your experiences. And there will be time for questions at the end. So Dr. Nevado, do you want to present first? Oh.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you for the introduction, Jackie. Okay, so like Jackie said, I'm a pediatric psychologist at Akron Children's Hospital. I work in the adolescent medicine department, and then I specialize in eating disorders. I graduated in 2015 from the PsyD program, and I have kind of gone all over the country. So I did my internship at Denver Health. One of the things that I chose to do at Denver Health was actually, I had originally always been kind of really child focused. And I knew that I wanted to make sure that whatever it was that I was ultimately going to do with my career, that I also knew what I was going to not be doing. So I actually actively chose to take an adult track internship year. So I worked primarily throughout different departments within the Denver Health Medical Center, and then ultimately decided, yeah, adult work is great, but I want to go back to working with kind of young adults and such. So that was something that was really important to me. And I think that was a piece of advice that I had gotten from a mentor before, is that oftentimes, you kind of always want to be asking yourself, what don't we know, right? What are ways that we can kind of challenge ourselves? Because I think we often get very comfortable in, finding one track, and you can sometimes be really surprised with what life can offer you. So while it was a great, awesome experience and I would never change it, I just ultimately helped me really solidify my idea that I wanted to work with kind of adolescents and young adults, and not really kind of with the older adults, each to their own. Okay, so then after being at Denver Health, I completed a fellowship, an APA fellowship at McLean Hospital, which is a psychiatric hospital in Massachusetts. And I was on a DBT team. So dialectical behavior therapy is a specific type of treatment. I imagine y'all have heard this before, but essentially I had been doing dialectical behavior therapy throughout my entire time while at PAU and at the Stanford program. So I ultimately knew that I wanted to kind of get back to not only working with adolescents and young adults, but also doing dialectical behavior therapy. I wanted to really focus on my specialization. So I did a fellowship there at a residential program for kind of young adult women with self-harm, borderline personality disorder diagnoses and such. So I really got to specialize. I was there for about, 4 or 5 years, I believe. It was 4 years or so. Before I ultimately, just because of life, decided to leave McLean and kind of, oh, hola, doctora Revilla. Sorry, I totally got distracted. I apologize. She was one of my first supervisors, and kind of being able to speak in Spanish, which was something that was important. So anywho, I was at McLean Hospital. I did my specialization, and then, you know, kind of life happened, and my husband took a job out in Ohio. So that was a big change, and came out here. One of the things that while I was at McLean that they really emphasized, which I think a lot of programs don't, and I think this is something that in terms of our mental health training is something that I think we can kind of do a better job at, is actually how to develop your own private practice. So we actually, one of our primary goals while on fellowship, as well as being at McLean, they actually emphasize you doing your own private practice. So we would often have patients that we had been seeing, you know, kind of inpatient or at the residential, then actually move to our own private practice. So that was something that was really neat, and I think a unique experience. So if anybody has any interest in getting more information about that, I'd be happy to provide consultation and support to anybody interested in that. It's scary, but not as scary as you think, right? Makes a lot of sense. That's what happens when we're nervous and worried, right? We have to approach it usually less scary. So I had been doing private practice work. And so ultimately, when I moved to Ohio, I really wanted to stick with dialectical behavior therapy. It's not a common thing kind of all throughout the nation. And so I ended up joining a group practice that was a outpatient general group practice. So I did that for about a year. And then COVID hit and life happened. And so I ultimately decided, you know, I kind of needed a little bit of a break, which was fine. And so I ultimately took some time to just do my private practice one-on-one. I actually still carry some patients out in Massachusetts because I'm licensed both in Massachusetts and in Ohio. And then ultimately I started working at Akron Children's Hospital. One of the things that I had noticed was the comorbidities between people who struggle with kind of borderline personality disorders. There's often a high comorbidity with like eating disorders. And so I knew that I wanted to I was ready for the next step in terms of trying new, you know, kind of clinical work. And so I am now part of this eating disorder team, which is great. So that's kind of my trajectory. That was like my career course. One of the things that Jackie had actually emailed about was, you know, some advice for like how we can be competitive and what are ways that we can continue to develop as we prepare to kind of hit the job market and looking for internships and things like that, and, you know, practicum experiences. So one of the things that I think so my Latin background is I was actually born in Peru. I came to the US when I was 1.5. My mom is actually a medical interpreter in Spanish and in English. And so I am very fortunate that my parents really emphasized being bilingual. So at every opportunity that I could, I actually practiced really finding ways to push myself to speak Spanish. So I always say I'm technically illiterate because I never went to school for it. I think I have like a 2nd grade reading level right now, but I'm fluent in it, right? So one of the things that I really tried to do was at every practicum find a way to practice, right? Because, you know, we don't often use medical jargon or terms that, you know, kind of psychological terms at home. Now, some of us do, but it was atypical for me. So I actually, on my internship, one of the things that they offered was actually a medical Spanish speaking like seminar. And so it was like a 12 weeks of intensive, you know, kind of class that I would go to, that my internship actually allowed me to use some of the funding that they had, because what would happen then is that it actually allowed you to prepare to take the medical certification to be a bilingual provider at the hospital, which was really cool. So that was really fun. My parents are very happy, especially my mom. So anyways, so yes, that was one thing. So one piece of advice would be at any practicum site that you're at, if it's something that's important to you to be able to practice in a bilingual setting, is to find a way to do that. So actually, Dr. Revilla, actually, when I was at CHAC, she was actually, I think, Dr. Revilla, you hadn't actually fully come over as a supervisor at the time, but I think you had offered kind of support then.
Working on it. Yeah. And that was one. So great.
It was a great opportunity. So there were definitely times where, you know, I had supervision with Dr. Revilla, and it's a really neat and unique opportunity. And it also highlights the fact that as a, kind of a Latinx community, our language is so diverse. I still have great stories where I was saying terms that, in Peru mean one thing, and in other cultures, in other countries mean another thing, that were very awkward. But, how do you tolerate those moments, and how do you, kind of show your radical genuineness, that we don't have it all perfectly put together. And one of the things that I've really loved about working with the Latinx community is just how forgiving we are. We're really eager, especially kind of monolingual Spanish speaking parents, where they have adolescents that are bilingual. They just are so much more willing, and just any help is really important. And so if we mess up some words, or if we accidentally say things that are very embarrassing, like talking about sex when you intend to just be using a filler word, they're very forgiving, and actually quite a fun time. So if we have time, I'll tell that story another time. So anyways, so that's essentially my advice, is as much as you can, trying to find opportunities to be able to practice your language skills, as well as seeking supervisors. A lot of people are more willing if we're willing to ask. So I think that's it for me. Is there anything else, Jackie, that I missed? I think I covered everything.
No, this is great. Thank you so much. There will probably be questions at the end. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your experience and all this helpful information. And I'll leave you now with Lorena, and she will share her experience.
Yes. So I'm Lorena Velasquez. I graduated in 2017 with the Master's of Art in Counseling. I started in the fall 2015. Let's see. I finished my hours and submitted them in November of 2020 and became licensed in June of this year. I did my practicum at the City of Fremont Youth and Family Services, as well as a little bit at Family Connections. And from there, after graduation, I applied to Starlight Community Services. I have a friend who worked here, and honestly, that's one of my biggest pieces of advice, is to network, because friends and people will connect you with great job opportunities. And yeah, I've been here for 3.5 years. I love it. I work in the outpatient department with children and families. What else? Yes, in my practicum, I learned that it's very important to speak Spanish. There's such a high need for it. And yeah, like Dr. Nevada was saying, parents are very forgiving. Spanish speakers are very forgiving, and they really are just so highly in need of help. But I was definitely on the opposite spectrum of speaking more English than Spanish. So it was a struggle. It was definitely something that was intimidating to me. And I just didn't feel confident about it. But practice. And honestly, the big jargon words are not going to work with parents anyways. So finding a way to kind of express yourself and use really regular words connects well with them. I think also using formal words, like referring to parents with usted, is very important, and also reducing that power differential and kind of getting on the same level with them. That's something definitely that I do regularly. And talking about it. A lot of parents are like, I don't know, do I refer to you as usted? And I'm like, no, like, there's no need. But yeah, some of the biggest things that I have seen working with Latinx families is the stigma of mental health and the disparities of low income and some of the things that cause a lot of the mental health disorders. and that's where kind of I struggle. I'm like, I feel so helpless, and I really want to, it really is about providing the families with resources. Yeah. Let's see what else. Definitely speaking Spanish is a blessing. Working here at Starlight, I get a 16% bump in pay. We also have a 2-hour kind of buffer for our productivity so that we can translate and spend that time with documentation. It is a salary job, so time management is very difficult, but important. Medi-Cal. So Starlight is Medi-Cal. We work with the low-income families who have Medi-Cal, and it's very tedious, very hard work, but I got my hours really quickly. And it's a blessing to work with these low-income families. I'm kind of at the position in my career where I get to choose, you know, to stay or do private practice or move on to a different kind of area. I don't have to stay in community mental health or with Medi-Cal clients. But I really enjoy working with the population. Like, you really feel like you're making a difference, and it's rewarding enough to kind of buffer some of that Medi-Cal paperwork headache. Yeah, definitely finding the population you enjoy working with is very important. Let's see. Keep track of your trainings. Oh, one thing I wanted to mention that was very helpful at PAU was role playing. And definitely we did a lot of that in Karen's class, in Dr. Roller's class. It was the most helpful, not only because you're learning the skills. Don't shy away, guys. Don't shy away from volunteering for those role plays. Do it. Do it because it's the most helpful in learning the skill, not just that, but it gets you in the habit of role playing. Role playing with clients in sessions is very helpful. What else? Yes, keep track of your trainings so you can list them on your resume. It's definitely going to help get you into those jobs. What else can I tell you? Keep a binder of all the forms, all the handouts, all the things you can use with clients. There's so many. There's so many. So it's helpful to keep a binder of those. What else? Definitely the Medi-Cal training is going to help in finding other jobs, or even in my position right now, if I choose to go in private practice, at least I have experience in the documentation, and that can kind of transfer over to the private practice. I love what Dr. Novato is doing with the private practice training. I think I myself have been using YouTube to figure out how to do, how do you do, there's no one to guide you to really let you know, like, what are the steps, and that is very nerve-wracking. So yes, I definitely appreciate that, and I will look into also finding some trainings. I think another subject that Dr. Novato brought up was supervisors and BIPOC supervisors, and looking for people who you can feel connected to. I would say, don't be afraid to ask for a different supervisor. Supervisors are like counselors. You have to vibe with them. You have to really feel comfortable. And if you don't be afraid to speak up, to ask, address what are the issues and what you would like to see. And it makes a world of difference. Yeah. Here at Starlight, we have a union. We're unionized. So if wherever you end up also has a union, I would highly recommend you get involved with that union. Get to know what your rights are, being able to speak up for yourself, and not being afraid to kind of do that. I think as a trainee and an associate, like we get very nervous and we feel like we're kind of at the bottom and we can't really, you know, our job is at risk, but that's often not the case. And most places are really working to work with you. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's all I have. Yeah, the options are endless. I would say explore your options and get to know the population you want to work with, and utilize your teachers for sure. Even after graduation, connect with them, and that's all part of the networking, right? It's very helpful. Okay, I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Lorena. This was very insightful. Thank you for sharing your experience. Now I'm going to leave you with Tim. He's here.
Yes, hi everyone. So again, my name's Tim. I just graduated from the Psychology and Social Action program back in this summer. I'm currently a family specialist, or more simply put, a behavioral specialist with Uplift Family Services. And I'm currently enrolled in an MA program at Santa Clara for counseling psychology. I am on the MFT track and my emphasis is in health psychology. So the last, I would say the 2 years while I was at PEAU, I really challenged myself to get as much experience as possible before I actually, committed to working in a specific site or things of that nature. And so I would say the best advice that I could give in terms of training opportunities at PAU, that internship requirement towards the end really was key in landing me a job after graduation. It really gave me an opportunity to gain a considerable amount of experience in the field before graduation. So that was really helpful. And I even participated in a work study with CAPS, which is the Continuing and Professional Studies Department at PAU. And I was working in content development. So, getting some experience with like learning management systems and online course creation was really helpful, especially if you're considering a job in, that sort of space. So in terms of where my, how I kind of got to the career where I am now, I'd have to really go back to what my life was like during my program. And so during my undergraduate program, I had about 5 to 6 years of experience in tech. And as I was approaching graduation, that made me feel really nervous because I didn't really have a lot of the skills that I had conceptualized myself to needing to be successful in the mental health field or in the nonprofit fields. And so, going back to how I was describing the internship, that really challenged me to take a step out of technology and really jump into a whole new industry, which is, in the community health and nonprofit sector. But while working full-time in tech, I started out my internship experience. It was about 10 hours a week with the city of San Jose, working in my council member's office. And so I got a lot of experience creating policy, and just connecting with community partners and resources. And then this shift sort of happened about 5 months later where I decided to change that focus. And this is where the biggest leap in my career took place. So I left technology, and I changed my internship site, and I began working full-time at the Bill Wilson Center, helping at-risk and homeless youth with continuing their education, whether it's getting their high school diploma or going to college. And so, this ability to complete my internship with this work experience was really helpful because I didn't have to worry about splitting my time different places, getting through my schoolwork and spending time with my kids. And it was just really, really chaotic. So simplifying that was what made it really, really easy for me. And then obviously after graduation, I decided to change my focus again and really support a different population, which currently in the position I'm in now with Uplift, I'm assisting students. It's a school linked service. So I go to different school sites and I support students in the K through 8, in their K through 8 education journey, with, you know, whatever their behavioral needs are, and partnering with parents and showing them best practices for how to help their child in their development and overcome these challenging behaviors. You know, and aside from that, like, I've also had an opportunity to really reflect, like, what sort of like experience and training at Palo Alto University really helped in my career. And I would definitely say, like, my experience as a student officer in Pulso, as the LTF liaison, you know, really helped me use those sort of concepts I was learning in my program to, like, sort of advocate for the Latinx student population, and host events to build community. And something that was really awesome that I was really nervous about going into the last quarter of the program was the senior seminar. My senior seminar was actually really awesome. It was with Dr. Cordova, and it actually really helped me discover where I wanted to, you know, focus my time in my field, which is in health psychology, which is why I chose the health psychology emphasis in my current program. Overall, like, this, I would feel like I would say, like, this program definitely prepared me for my career, or at least made me a bit more comfortable in knowing that, like, yes, I am, you know, comfortable talking about these concepts. You know, classes like, I would say, psychology of gender, fundamentals of social action, and international political economy, it really helped me become more informed about issues that can really impact our community's mental wellness, and, you know, how these social and systemic factors play a role in those challenges that we face today as experts in the mental health field. So, you know, I would say, like, my advice to students who would like to work in sort of like the similar position as I am, or in the mental health field or in the nonprofit field, is, you know, take a chance and participate in work studies at the school, participate in student organizations, connect with your academic advisor as often as possible, and really try to get involved in your community, whatever that might look like to you. As well as being intentional about, you know, where you choose to do your internship at, and not being afraid to change your internship if you find out it's not for you. I changed my internship site like about maybe twice, and my academic advisor, Dr. Trefalis, she was really supportive during that experience and really asked me some guiding questions about where I would like to focus my time, wherever I was going, and how that would tie into my current program. And, you know, I would say, like, the key to landing a position, you know, and many jobs in this area, at least in the nonprofit and community health industry, is really showing them that you genuinely care about helping people, that your work is rooted in challenging systemic oppression, and other challenges that people in our underserved communities face. And, you know, that you're really open to learning as much as possible. And yeah, that's about it for me.
Thank you so much, Tim, for presenting this information. And we have some time for questions. You can just unmute yourself and ask, or you can write in the chat and Nick will read the question. So to any of the panelists or to everybody, I mean, you can ask to a specific person or just an open question, and Dr. Nevado or Lorena, our team, can respond.
I wanted to ask a quick question if I could. Well, thank you to all three of you. I think you all said a lot about the experiences and how you have a lot of really good hands-on experiences. And I really appreciated that. I wanted to ask Dr. Nevado, because you mentioned that in your internships, they talk a lot about building a private practice. And I'm wondering if that's something that was kind of specialized to your experience, or is that something that kind of all internships in your area specialize in?
So thanks for the question. So it was my fellowship, and it was unique. No, that's okay. It was unique to the program. I think it's not common. You know, at least for me, I had never heard of it prior to being at the fellowship. And it was actually specific to be fully transparent, it was actually to manage the inequity in terms of the financial compensation. So they actually really emphasize, you know, we kind of have a lower fellowship pay rate than most national fellowships across the board, but we do help you develop your own private practice. And so then I was making substantially, like, you know, kind of a substantial amount of money doing private practice to help kind of balance my needs at the time.
That's so interesting. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah, no problem.
Hi, I have one question for the three panelists. So I am a student in my first year of the MA counseling in Palo Alto University. And so from January onwards until springtime, I think we're going to have to be focusing on looking for a site for a practicum. And given that supervision is so important, like the role of supervision, you all talked about that. I wonder if you can share with me some tips on what is it that I should be asking, you know, when I go to the fair, you know, when I look for a site, besides from focusing on the population that I want to work with and all those things, you know, what should I take into account regarding the answers that they give me, you know, with regards to supervision, you know, some team, maybe, you know, like you say, oh, you know, if they say something like this, be careful about that, or make sure that you ask that, you know, about this other thing, you know, it's going to be super important in terms of supervision, things like that. And thank you.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit more about that. I think every supervisor has a different style and their own personal organization skills. They're focusing different types of interventions and areas. And I think those are good things to ask. How do they manage their time? How do they support their clinicians? Populations that they have worked with, I think also can help. I think when it comes down to it, really, when you start working with the supervisor, you'll know, you know, something's off, something's not right. Address it in supervision with them. And if things don't work out, then yeah, don't be afraid to say like, hey, I don't think it's a right fit. Yeah. I don't know if anyone else wanted to add to that.
So a couple questions that I would often ask in terms of thinking about where a placement, like how it fit into for me was, so even if they didn't have, like if you really wanted to kind of practice being able to provide bilingual services, one of the things that I would often ask is, so if the primary supervisors aren't available, are there additional supports that can be offered? So actually, that's actually how I met Dr. Revilla. I had a primary supervisor, and then we had actually just started kind of a group supervision that was, you know, kind of bilingual. And so we were able to do that. And then as Dr. Revilla kind of said, I don't know if you all saw the chat, but that actually then developed into, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Revilla, but like a track. It actually became, yeah, it became a track at the program. So really just asking about if it isn't something that's housed within that particular practicum site, are there opportunities or you know, kind of collaborators that can help with that particular practicum? And to Lorena's point earlier, network, like just seeing about if there are other people in the community that can help you to get those kinds of supports if your practicum doesn't offer it.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Somebody who would want to either enter your question in the chat or just, you can just unmute yourself and ask.
I wanted to add something to what was just said. I'm Ricardo Munoz and Tim. Hi, good seeing you again. One thing I wanted to add is that for an internship, when I did my internship, which was a long time ago, but when I did my internship, which was at Sacramento Medical Center, you know, in the Central Valley, I arrived there and I asked to see Spanish-speaking patients. And I was told there were no Spanish-speaking patients. I thought, how could there be no Spanish-speaking patients in Sacramento, in the Central Valley? So I made it my business to, after I got there, to go to the community organizations, around the clinic and introduce myself and say, I speak Spanish. By the way, Adriana, soy tu paisano. Y entiendo decir eso de 7 y pico, hay que tener mucho cuidado con eso, ¿no? Pero, but soon I had a full load of Spanish-speaking patients. I didn't have a Spanish-speaking supervisor, but the point I'm trying to make is sometimes you can serve a community if you know the community has a need, even if the agency you're serving is not serving them, you can make it your business to try to drum up business. And there's so much need. It's not hard to do. So just a little tip.
I did get a question DM to me, so I'm going to read that out loud. That question reads, I've noticed it's imperative to become involved in the community and trying different internships. Have any of you seen any accommodation towards people with physical disabilities being able to get into the field without physically being able to get involved as often? Is there a direction any of you might recommend that you've seen others in the field getting involved in who can't be as hands-on from disabilities?
I mean, I would just say, like, going back to whether you're looking for an internship to complete your undergrad or your MA, definitely reaching out to whoever the host is and asking that question, like, since COVID changed the landscape of mental health services, off the, like, in so many ways. And at least in my agency, there is a big push towards telehealth. And so I think that, to sort of meet everyone's needs, there's going to be a greater need for telehealth. And so I think that that's something that's a question worth asking when you're interviewing or looking for potential sites is, what does the opportunity look like to conduct sessions or do work over computer or the phone or whatnot. So definitely asking that question during your initial, like, interview and things like that.
Hello, sorry, I had a quick question as well. Thank y'all for doing this. I'm actually an undergraduate. I'm a second year, so I'm very early on in my career, but I actually have a question for Dr. Nevado. I was wondering, kind of in this ID program, were you able to start like specializing in eating disorders, which is what you were interested in, or was it afterwards?
So actually, funny story is I always said I never wanted to do eating disorder work. So I actually intentionally chose to go a different track when I was at PAU. So I ended up, it was a later career decision.
Thank you.
Yeah, I will say, if you know what you want to do, which, some people do and some people don't, either way is fine. I think the advice that I would give is, if you're really interested, trying to get a variety of different opportunities within that particular area. So, for example, trying outpatient eating disorder work versus inpatient eating disorder work versus residential eating disorder work, like trying it in a variety of different ways, I think is really helpful when you start to think about, kind of internship opportunities, if you decide, kind of the different expectations for graduation. The more diverse your experience, the better. You can always weave a narrative. That was a really important piece of advice that I got when thinking about my internship. I often felt like, I have all these random pieces. And I think there is always a way to kind of tell your narrative for all of those pieces to fit, and really leaning on your supervisors and academic advisors for help with that. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
I see there was a question in the chat about the buffer hours at my agency, and I just wanted to give a little bit more information on that. So our union worked with the agency directly to make sure that we had enough time to do our translation, because our documents, everything is in making sure that the families have their preferred language. So that goes down to treatment plan writing, report writing, needs to be in their language. So at Starlight, we are expected to meet a 65% productivity rate out of 40 hours. And as a bilingual clinician, we drop 2 hours from that. So it would be 65% productivity out of 38 hours.
Thank you, Lorena, for explaining that, because that is something for me so important, because our student clinicians and even any psychotherapist many times does a lot of extra work that is sort of expected and they get for granted. So honestly, this is the first time that I see that an agency is valuing that and recognizing that extra time. Because it's so important, and it's also, I think it's important for us to fight for that, because it's a lot of extra work that we do, and it's they need to really value it and pay for it. So yeah, thank you for clarifying that, Lorena.
Yeah, I think there's such a high need for Spanish-speaking clinicians in the Santa Clara County that they do what they can to hold on to us, so that it's not such a quick turnaround.
And that's also true for other kinds of things like teaching and research, where you have to do things in Spanish. You basically have to translate all the stuff, and it takes an extra effort. So there should be some kind of recognition in terms of pay for that. Dr. Nevado, you mentioned that you got a special certificate, right? For being bilingual. Do you also get a pay differential for that?
I did. Yeah, I got a one-time pay, but then I also had I think it was 25 cents more. I mean, it was nominal, but also, to be fair, my primary work wasn't in seeing kind of bilingual clients, but yes, I did get it just as an opportunity and as a recognition, plus a one-time fee.
Yeah, it shouldn't be just because you speak another language. So it should be because you use the language in the work, right?
Correct. Correct.
That's what deserves the extra pay.
Yeah, and there were 2 tiers actually. There was the first tier, which was being able to function at one level, and then there was another designation that came with a higher pay rate as well. But I was only there for a year, so I didn't go for the second certification.
I just wanted to take an opportunity. Nick had posted a question in the chat regarding, how concepts in psychology intersect with the technology field, and what my experience was in that. And I would definitely say that there is a push for mental health in the technology space. When I was leaving my job at the time, which, to be transparent, I was working at Apple in the retail space. There was a really big push for implementing more sort of mindfulness and other mental well-being practices into the workplace. And a lot of the products that we use now, like the watch or the phone, they're implementing a lot of features that are very heavily invested in being mindful and promoting this mental wellness that we talk about. And so I would say that my experience in that field was in the psychological field was really helpful in being able to partner with a lot of the people in the industry, and just offering my expertise and how we could do things a little bit differently that might be a bit more effective in that space. And if you're looking for a job in tech, a lot of companies right now are looking for licensed therapists to conduct telehealth services. There is just such a need, and the landscape of mental health services is really changing. And so the need for therapists in technology or mental health professionals in technology is definitely a need. So I was a bit nervous about leaving, but I was comfortable knowing that I could always come back, because just there's going to be a need. And so don't let that discourage you if you're looking for a job in technology.
Yeah, I would second what Tim is saying. Actually, there's actually several of my classmates actually have created kind of, I don't know what you would call it, but essentially they've created a tech in mental health. And then actually 2 of my classmates One of them was at the Palo Alto VA, and she actually helped collaborate on an app for PTSD. And so she actually pulled two of us that were from her class that were bilingual speakers, and we actually helped translate and provide the app in Spanish for the Palo Alto VA for their PTSD app. So there's a lot of opportunities for bilingual and mental health providers to be able to work within the tech industry.
I see that we have 10 minutes left. So do we have any other questions for any of our panelists or any of our faculty?
I'd like to make another brief comment about language. It goes beyond direct clinical work. Dr. Pineda and I have been involved in a project for the National Academies this last year, in which they were building a set of web tools that have just been launched for children and adolescents to deal with the stress of COVID. And they decided they were going to translate it to Spanish, which was wonderful, except that they had decided to create it all in English, and then at the end, do the translation, And luckily I was chair of the expert panel that was doing this. So I said, no, you can't do that. You have to do it simultaneously. And of course, there were no resources to do that, right? So Dr. Pineda and I volunteered to go ahead and do this with two other colleagues from the CDC, actually, who was funding this project. And so we spent, the last year going over when the English drafts were being created by the expert panel, we would translate them and suggest changes for the English language too, because when you say things, you try to say things clearly, for people, ideally, who have a 6th, 8th grade education. Then you have to simplify the language. And so sometimes by saying it in Spanish, we could then tell the English-speaking group to also change the English so that it sounded more simple, clearer. So sometimes doing things like that is a good idea. Don't wait until everything is done and then translate it. I think we can contribute to making English clearer and more accessible to people too.
Yeah, I agree with that, because I also think one thing too, in thinking about, because I imagine the majority of us here have student loans, and how are we going to pay those back? Like being able to do this while working, kind of doing it as these side hustles, is also a really great way for you to kind of develop your CV and different opportunities, because that's still something that is, kind of opportunities to develop your skill set.
Maria, you can go ahead and ask.
Yeah, I had a question talking about student loans. So this question might be for Lorena Velasquez or any of the panel. Is there a substantial difference between the pay rate when you're still in AMFT and once you become licensed?
For me, it was a 10% bump in pay.
Once you become licensed?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for answering that.
In case there's no more questions, or I can speak for 10 seconds and let you guys think of something else if you're debating whether or not to ask another one. We have been recording this whole event, so we'll be sending you an email pretty soon, most likely sometime next week, with the link to this recording. So feel free to use it as a resource. If there's answers that you got to your question that you want to refer back to, you can. And we're also going to be posting this to PAU's YouTube channel so that you can use this as a shareable resource as well.
So if we don't have any more questions, thank you, Nick, for mentioning that. And thank you, Dr. Nevado, Lorena, and team for coming today, for sharing your experiences and tips, and for answering questions. And thank you, everybody else, for joining us today and being here and taking some time off your busy schedule to be here. Thank you.